Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition here on the Rock Pile. Tonight I am on the Rock Pile. Last week I tried that Facebook Live thing. Not for me. I got to be organized a little bit, and I was so lost here, um, as I do on all the shows. My notes are up on the screen, so only I can see them. And last week I had all these printouts, and I'm sitting here scrambling through it. I'm like, I just feel lost. So tonight I brought it back the old way. So thanks for tuning in tonight. If you're on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, or right here on Facebook, you get me all by myself. Chalk Talk tonight with Coach Little C. And tonight I'm going to go through. I'm going to recap some of the games from last week that I thought were some big games. I'll go through the 12-team playoff was just released last night. I'll give you my thoughts. Big Ten, SEC heavy at the top. There's a couple of teams, though, I think that got screwed a little bit. I'll talk about that. Of course, I'm going to go a show. I can't go a show without mentioning Coach Prime, so we'll go through that. Syracuse got a win. Syracuse will take on UConn this week. So I'll give you some predictions at the end of the show. If you got any questions for me, put them in the comments here. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. But I want to start with some games from last week. The first game I want to talk about is Kansas and BYU. And if you guys remember, Kansas to start the season was preseason top 15 coming into the season. They had some injuries. Jalen Daniels, no, not Jaden Daniels, the quarterback for Washington. Jalen Daniels was hurt most of the season. He's back. Right now, Kansas is playing really good the last 2 weeks. BYU, I know a lot of people were high on BYU. I was, and I still think, BYU controls their own destiny. Listen, they win this week um, against Arizona State, who I think Arizona State's going to beat them handily. But let's say that BYU beats Arizona State. BYU is in the Big 12 title game. If Colorado wins out, that's who they'll see. But Kansas back in this game. Kansas controlled this game. BYU didn't really look like itself, and this was at BYU. They had their chances late, didn't happen. Devin Neal, the back for Kansas, who's also been banged up. They have a really good running back in Devin Neal. Jalen Daniels is back. He's playing really good football. And they actually have a really good wide receiver. So I think this week, Kansas against Colorado, who I'll pick at the end of the game and we'll get into a little bit. I think it's going to be a really good game for Colorado. I think they're going to get tested because I don't think it's the Kansas team that started the year with all the injuries. I think it's the Kansas team that was preseason top 15. And Colorado and Coach Prime go to Kansas, who I think Lance Leipold, if you remember last year, the season they had, he's been named for every job imaginable. And his name's still going to come up. With a lot of these jobs. So I think Kansas could be a really tough out for Colorado. But I do think Colorado, when it's all said and done, will find a way to get by. The other game that was a really interesting game, and I think it goes back to, I think Oregon's bored. And this is one of the things I'll say. I think the Big Ten schedule, Oregon hasn't had to play anybody outside of Ohio State. I know they say they played Michigan. Michigan's horrible this year, so I'm not really counting Oregon. But Oregon trailed in this game late, heading into the fourth quarter. They trailed by a touchdown. Oregon outscored Wisconsin late in that game. I think they outscored them like 10-0. Oregon, they erased the deficit against Ohio State. Listen to this number. Wisconsin's 2-15 in the last 17 games against top 25 teams. Luke Fickell's 0-7 in the last 2 years. I don't know. If I'm a Luke Fickell guy, I thought he would have got the Ohio State job if Ryan Day didn't get it. I thought Fickell, did a great job at Cincinnati, and now he comes over to Wisconsin, and I just don't think they've really performed under him. I think they've underperformed a little bit. But listen, they gave the Ducks all they could handle. I think Dan Lanning's team's a little bored. I think they're really good defensive. I think the roster that Oregon's put together is second to none. You could arguably say that Ohio State's roster is the best in the country. I think I said that last week, and I'll still say it again. I think it is the best roster in the country. But although Ohio State had a big blow today, not many people are going to pay any attention to Seth McLaughlin, the center for Ohio State, tore his Achilles in practice. He's out for the year. Just think about this for a minute. People are going to say, well, who is this guy? He was the center for Alabama last year that had the horrible snap in the against Michigan that set Michigan up. They had the big goal line stand on 4th and 1 from like what the 1 yard line. They snapped it low to Jalen Hurts, and Michigan collapsed on him, and the rest is history. Well, he got hurt for Ohio State, and Ohio State's line, the interior, the guards, were struggling most of the season. They started playing a little bit better, and that's really because the guy at center, who was a senior, was basically the captain of that offensive line who started to play better the last few weeks. I think it's a big blow for the Buckeyes. A lot of people are going to say, nah, they still got enough. They do have enough talent. But I think going forward into these playoffs, I think it could be tough for the Buckeyes. The other game I thought was probably the game of the week, Georgia, Tennessee. Tennessee hasn't been able to solve the Georgia problem, and I love Josh Heupel. I think Josh Heupel is one of the best coaches in the country. The key for me in this game, Carson Beck played like the Carson Beck who was supposed to be the #1 quarterback in the draft. And I still think he's going to be a first rounder, maybe a late first, early second. He played really well. Georgia hasn't had much on the outside, and I think the old line hasn't played that well. They got dominated in the trenches against Ole Miss when Ole Miss hammered them 28-10 down in Lane Land down at Ole Miss. I think they played really well. I think they were physical up front. I think Carson Beck, who threw 2 touchdowns, but he also ran for one and made some plays with his feet. If that's the Georgia team that we see, and I think what's really crazy here is right now Georgia's the 10th seed in the playoffs, who might not even stay in the playoff race right now. And I'll get to that a little bit later in the show because I think a 2-team Georgia with the schedule that they played, I think their strength of schedule is like 5th in the country. They've played everybody. And right now they're 10th. They'd be on the road in the playoffs if it started today, which I think is absolutely crazy. Now the schedule, they're going to play UMass that just fired Don Brown, the former Michigan defensive coordinator. I like Don Brown at UMass. So they'll play UMass. They'll have the rivalry game against Georgia Tech. And then I think Tennessee goes UTEP, who's a layup. So I think Tennessee should win that game. And then Tennessee's got to go play Vanderbilt. Well, I think it might be at Vandy. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, that's their rivalry game. Vanderbilt's been much improved this year than they were the last 2 years. So hats off to Vandy. But I think Georgia's going to be a team right now that you do not want to see come playoff time if they get in. And I'm saying if they get in, because right now they're at the 10th spot and they're not guaranteed depending on what happens over the next 2 weeks. So we'll see what happens there. Some other scores from the week. Ohio State beat Northwestern. It was kind of a boring game. It was like 14-7 most of the way, and then Ohio State pulled away in that game. Texas and Arkansas. This is a really interesting one to me. Texas has played one game this year, and they got handled to Georgia. Other than that, Texas hasn't played anybody in the SEC. So my question is going to be, the last game of the year for them is against A&M. A lot of people might be debating saying if A&M beats Texas, is Texas out of the playoff conversation? I don't know. I don't think they've been very good. I mean, Arkansas is one of those 500 teams. Sam Pittman, who's been on the hot seat, I think he's going to survive another year there. But we'll see. But I think they struggled for most of that game. I think Texas has a lot of skilled guys. They're again, Quinn Ewers. I mean, they probably have the best quarterback room in the country. But I don't think they've looked very good. But I just don't think they've played the schedule that some of these other SEC schools have played. So I think we'll see a little bit more about Texas as the year goes over the next 2 weeks. The other one that people are going to talk about, and again, we got to be getting close to Notre Dame getting in a conference. This independent thing for Notre Dame is going to cost them, one of the byes. So they're going to be on the road somewhere. But I'll tell you what, tip your hat to Marcus Freeman, because after that NIU loss, they have just ran the tape. They have blown everybody out. At the time, they blew out Navy, who Navy was ranked in the top 25. Their big matchups this week against Army, who, by the way, is really good. But if Notre Dame wins out, a one-loss Notre Dame, potentially you're looking at maybe a one-loss Indiana over a one-loss Notre Dame. And people are even saying a two-loss Tennessee may not get in over a one-loss Notre Dame. And on a neutral field, listen, I'm here to tell you, you could put anybody in that mid to bottom pack of the SEC, put Tennessee against Indiana, put Tennessee against Notre Dame. I think Tennessee beats them by 2 touchdowns. I do. But I think a lot of people, unless you're a Notre Dame fan, I think a lot of people, if for, they're going to say, well, NIU, Notre Dame, NIU, they got beaten in Northern Illinois, who was on TV last night, lost to Miami of Ohio, who's going to play for the MAC championship. But I think Marcus Freeman has done a really good job. They're really good up front. They can run the football, and they play a really good defense. So we'll see what happens with them. I think they get the Trojans here in a couple weeks in that rivalry game. So we'll see a little bit more there. One of the teams I don't think anybody's talking about, and I'll talk about them a little bit later in the show, SMU beat Boston College. SMU right now, folks, can run the table in the ACC. Right now, it's SMU and Miami in the ACC championship game. And I'll tell you what, if you haven't watched SMU, they're really good. I would take SMU right now to come out of the ACC. There's still a lot to go, right? You got to see what Miami does. Cam Ward, the Heisman candidate, has played really well this year for the U. So we'll see. But if you had to give me a pick right now, I tell you I'm on the SMU bandwagon, but we'll see how it plays out. And then some other games I don't think anybody really cared about. Penn State beating a horrible Purdue team, 49-10, who my wife and I saw Purdue, Ohio State 2 weeks ago, where Ohio State just throttled them. Again, Penn State, same thing. They played Ohio State close, haven't played anybody. They're going to have one loss heading into the playoffs, and then they're probably going to play an SEC team at Penn State, which would be crazy in mid-December. It could be snowing at Penn State, but whoever Penn State plays, if it's Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, if it's an SEC team, I will take the SEC team over Penn State. But man, I'll tell you, that Penn State defense is really good. To try to go into Happy Valley in possibly cold, snowy weather, they can run the football. They play really good defense. I think it'd be a big opportunity for James Franklin to have a really big win under his belt. Now, if he loses, people are going to say, geez, James can't win the big one. Well, James can't win the big one, and his record against top 25 teams are terrible, and his record against top 5 teams are even worse. So it should be a really interesting game to see who they play. Normally, you see Penn State every year falter one game in the season. You say, geez, how did they lose that game? I don't know if we'll see it here with 2 weeks left in the regular season, but you never know. The other game, Colorado, 49-24 winners over Utah. I know it's not the same Utah team. Cam Rising, the quarterback, is injured. He's out for the season. Makes a huge difference. Didn't look like the Utah teams that we've seen over the last, I don't know, as many years as Kyle Whittingham been there. But this is a game, again, Colorado, 49 points, and all you hear after the game is, well, we didn't play our best game. Prime keeps saying we haven't played our best game yet all season. Now, I don't know, 49 points to me would say pretty good offense. They started slow. Shador had the turnover. Travis Hunter had the reverse late in the game where he ran it for a touchdown. He did have the interception. Again, I think he's the best player in the country. I think he deserves the Heisman Trophy. I know people are going to say Genty. We'll talk about him a little bit late in the show too. But Colorado cruises. And again, Colorado, they're going to play Kansas this week at Kansas, so I think it's a trap game. I think it's going to be a really good game because I think Kansas right now is better than what people think. They're playing like the top 10 team that they started the year with, so I think it's going to be a really good game. And then they'll get a home game against a really beat-up Mike Gundy Oklahoma State team. I can't believe how bad Gundy's team is. Normally his teams get off to a really good start. They fall apart late in the year, and it's like, they're 8-4. 9-3. Gundy gets to a bowl game, and they find a way. They are atrocious this year. They are horrible this year. So I think if Prime gets this one, I think the win this week clinches the Big 12 title game for Colorado. Iowa State's got 2 losses. Kansas State, I think, is down to 2 losses, maybe 3. BYU's got 1, but I think BYU gets beat up this week to Arizona State. So you could see Colorado, Arizona State. And how about the job that Kyle's done up there, Dillingham has done at Arizona State? If you haven't seen Arizona State play, they're another team that's really good, that nobody thought they were going to be any good this year. And I saw a poll in a ranking this week on one of the games I was watching on Saturday night, and they said the Big 12 coaches rankings. They had the BYU coach was at the bottom, Prime was at the bottom. I think they had Matt Campbell, I think they had Gundy and those guys at the top, but they had all those coaches at the bottom. It's like you look at it right now and you say, okay, it's completely flipped, and it is. So I think Colorado's got a really good chance. And I keep saying this, I'm going to say it again. I got my Prime sweatshirt on tonight, and I told my wife, I said, I want one thing for Christmas. I want a Sanders jersey for Christmas. Listen, people are going to say you're on the bandwagon. Listen, Michigan's horrible this year. Fordham struggled this year. I'm not a huge Syracuse fan, so I really don't have any dog in the fight left. My wife's got two teams left, and they happen to be two of the best teams in the country, in Ohio State and Oregon, where she's from. So I have to root for somebody. When Dion got this job, I said it was a great hire. I jumped all over it from day one, and it's great to see the success he's having. So I got to support Coach Prime. I'm pulling for him that they can finish this thing out the right way. I want to get into a few storylines that caught my attention as well over the weekend. And I don't know if people really follow Shane Beamer and what a job he's done at South Carolina. This is a South Carolina team that had LSU down to the wire to the last play. They should have beaten Alabama this year. South Carolina's got 3 losses, but they are really, really good. These last 3-4 games, defensively, they're good. They can run the football. They got a really young quarterback. Shane Beamer has done a hell of a job coaching. And I remember at one point, I think some people said, man, maybe it's time for Shane Beamer to go. Last year, he goes to a bowl game. And then this year, they're on target to go to another bowl game. They've beaten 3 ranked teams in a row the last 3 weeks. And they have probably one of the best redshirt quarterbacks in the country, Lenore Seller, who's the quarterback for South Carolina, who's really good. And he's had a really good year for South Carolina. So I think the job that Shane Beamer's done, they started the year at 3-3, and they've won 4 in a row. And that's a really tough place to play. So I'm really, really happy for Shane Beamer that he's having the success that he's having there at South Carolina. I still think at some point in time, and I don't want to see anybody lose their job. If Brent Pry at Virginia Tech were to lose his job at any point in time, if I'm the university, I'm calling Shane Beamer and I am throwing everything but the kitchen sink at him saying, what's it going to take to get you to come to Virginia Tech to be the head football coach? I'm not saying it happens, but I'm just saying that maybe he's really happy, where he's at. The other one that caught my attention, I was on this last week. I know my brother-in-law messaged me and said you were spot on about this. I'm not really spot on about a lot of things. I say a lot of crazy things when we talk college football. Sometimes I just say them to say them and say if it comes true, I look like a hero. Is the AD at Florida decided to keep Billy Napier. And at the midway through this season, they just beat LSU 27-16 down at the Swamp, and they manhandled them. Nobody in America thought that Billy Napier was going to survive. If you look at the schedule that they've had, it's just been brutal if you look at the schedule. So right now he's at 500. He's got all the support from his players, which that's the most important thing about, I think, the reason why they decided to bring him back. DJ Lagway, the freshman quarterback, is going to be a stud. He's going to be a star at Florida. I think Florida next year is going to be really good next season because this whole team stood together. When everybody, including myself, at one point said, I don't think there's any way Billy Napier survives. I don't think there's any way. And then you look at the schedule, you say, he's got Ole Miss, Florida, Bama, Georgia, LSU, and you sit there and say, I don't know. I can't find any wins for this guy. And he's at 500. Now, don't get me wrong. The expectations at Florida aren't to go 5-5 or 6-6, 7-5. The expectations are national championship. But I think when you look at the schedule and the way this thing started, I think if you'd have asked anybody but Billy Napier and his kids if he'd still be the head coach, I think they'd tell you you're crazy. So I think Florida hit a home run in making the decision to bring him back. Because if you watch them guys, to have them at 500, to see what they did to LSU, they manhandled LSU, manhandled them. And the other thing I'm going to throw right out there, I've never been a Brian Kelly fan. I couldn't stand him when he was at Notre Dame. I drew a blank there. I'm thinking Notre Dame. He's been all over the place, but I couldn't stand him when he was at Notre Dame. And he decided, well, I'm going to go to LSU because they got better resources and blah, 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 blah. And look at the job Marcus Freeman's done since he left. But anyways, back to Billy Napier. They're going to play Ole Miss this week. Oh, I think, again, I think Ole Miss is a really scary team. So let's say they lose that game. They're going to play Florida State in a rivalry game, who I would put my money on Florida today, that they beat Florida State here in 2 weeks. And say they go 6-6 and they go to a bowl game. Again, with that schedule, I don't think anybody saw it coming. So hats off to Florida. Hats off to the athletic director. Hats off to the entire university for bringing him back. And I am pulling for Billy Napier. The other one, I don't know if you guys even saw this story. I think it's a great story. Kennesaw State former head coach, because he was fired, Brian Bohannon. Now, Kennesaw State was an FCS school where for 9 years, he was the head coach and guided them through the transition from FCS into the FBS. And as an FCS school, they made the playoffs 4 times, and they actually fired him last week. Now, they showed this on ESPN. I thought it was really cool, and I really tipped my hat to Brian Bohannon for doing this. But Bill Pogge, the coach at Charlotte, who just got fired, did the same thing. I'll get to that in a minute. So Brian Bohannon showed up at the team's walk as they were walking to the stadium. He was out there high-fiving his players, fist-bumping his players, giving his players hugs. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, this guy just got fired. And first of all, Kennesaw State, I put a comment up on Twitter. I just threw it up there for the heck of it. And I said, you guys made a wrong decision, the classless move to fire a guy that spent the last 9 years building this program and transitioning into their first year at the FBS level. That post that I made, I just looked today. I think it's over 80,000 people viewed it. And I was like, wow, 80, like who follows Kennesaw State? But I think it was just a really good story. I know they're struggling this year. I think they're 1-10. They're one of the worst programs in the country next to, I don't want to say it too loud because my buddy's the offensive coordinator there. Kent State's 0-10. I think they haven't won a game yet. But I thought that was a really good move. And Bill Pogge, the Charlotte coach, who just got fired from there as well. He was Jim Harbaugh's former assistant head coach at Michigan, who, by the way, he's meeting with Sharon Moore today. So I think he'll be back at Michigan. But he showed up at practice today, and the players went nuts. And it was really cool to see. And it just goes to tell you that no matter if your players care about you as a coach at that level, it's all about a business. And Charlotte made the move to part ways with them. But I mean, again, Charlotte's hasn't been very good. Like UMass, who was at FCS school, they fired Don Brown. They've been horrendous. These are tough programs to win games at. And you got to give these coaches some time, at least give them a couple recruiting classes, portal moves, whatever it might be, to try to win games, especially at these schools that don't have the resources. They don't have the money that some of these other schools may have. The other one that I want to put up here just that caught my eye, of course, we've been talking about it. And I know once they lose, everybody's going to say, well, there goes your Coach Prime. And I thought the thing that was really cool about last week's game in Boulder, and I think Colorado's been on TV just about every week, and they were the prime game on a big noon kickoff on Fox, and Joe Cladd and Jenny Taft and Gus Johnson had the call. But I think what's really cool about this is if you saw Peggy, the long-time fan who just turned 100 years old, when Dion got this job, he said he promised Peggy that he'd get her to a bowl game. And he's obviously gotten her to a bowl game now because they're 8-2, so they're going somewhere. And I just think it's really cool, the relationship he's built with her. The whole stadium saying happy birthday to this 100-year-old lady who to me looked like Sophia from the Golden Girls, reminding me of my grandmother and my Aunt Teresa, because we used to call them the Golden Girls. But just to see the excitement that a coach has had on a program. And, a lot of people questioned whether or not could Dion coach. He came from Jackson State at HBCU school. Can it translate over to Colorado? And last year, when he got this job, they started off, I think, 3-0. They were ranked, and the next thing you know, they finished 4-8. They weren't very good. And now this year they're 8-2. And I said this last week on the show, and I'm going to say it again. They were 1-11 before he got there. They were really, really, really bad. And I know one of the things about college football today is you can build these programs now a lot quicker because of the portal. And a lot of players came to Colorado. I think this year they brought 40 kids over in the portal. And next year, if he stays at Colorado, they'll probably do the same thing. But to see a program that had no life finally have life, to see the stadium full, to see kids cheering, to see a 100-year-old lady who hasn't seen success in I don't know how many years, to see her smiling and dancing and just seeing what he's brought to Colorado. It's more about the X's and O's. He can lose the next 2 games and finish 8-4, and people are going to say, I told you he's a fraud. Ask the athletic department how much money Deion Sanders has brought to Colorado. If you remember when he got the job, they couldn't even tell you what Deion's contract was. He didn't even know what his contract was. Deion Sanders bet on himself, and he bet on the AD, who the AD behind the scenes said, I'm going to get him the money. And he knew what he was doing because Deion was going to bring in money for them to pay him the money, and it's worked out really well for Coach Prime, who, by the way, said at the beginning of the year when they were talking about Shedeur Sanders, who's, by the way, was like the 5th rated quarterback, I think, when the season started, wasn't even on the draft board and as a first rounder. He's on the draft board, but not as first rounder. He said, I'm not going to be surprised if Shedeur and Travis Hunter go 1-2. Well, right now, when I look at my sheet and I look and see who the number 1 and number 2 pick is going to be, it's those two. He's the best quarterback in the country. So they have the best quarterback in the country. They have the best player in the country. They have some of the best skilled players in the country. And they've gotten a lot better defensively. They've gotten a lot better up front. I'm not saying that they're going to win the next 2 games. They could. They should. They're going to be favored. Now, against Kansas, they're only like a 2.5-point favorite. I think at home they'll be a good favorite against Oklahoma State. And then if they play Arizona State, who I think will be really good for them, BYU, I think they'll still be favored. But the people are waiting for him to lose. They're waiting. He tells the media in his interviews, you guys don't want to see me win. You want to see us win, but we don't care. We just keep silencing the doubters because all we do is focus on ourselves and we win games. And then, I think some reporter this week was talking about Travis Hunter. And the guy says, Prime, I got to ask you a question about Travis Hunter. And, Deion's sick and tired of answering these questions about Travis Hunter because he's always like, if you watch us, this, I could have told you this week too that he was the best player in the country, but whatever. One of the reporters says, well, Travis hasn't had a lot of tackles. And Deion goes, you got to be kidding me. And I'm sitting back here saying to myself, as a reporter, you're going to say that Travis Hunter doesn't have a lot of tackles. So just think about that. The football gods out there know what I'm going to say here. But for you to don't really, maybe some of you guys that don't follow it as much as the football gurus do, like myself, or I think I call myself that. I'm not, but I'm just saying in general. But anyways, if your secondary's making tackles, that's a problem. Depending on the defense that you run, maybe the safeties are down in the boxes, linebackers, that's different. But if your corners are making a lot of tackles, that's a problem. That means your front 4, your front 7, however you want to call it, are not doing their job up front. Now, maybe the corners are going to play run support and blah, 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 blah. I get that. But I think any coach you talk to would say, if your corner leads a team in tackles, you have major problems up front. That's the question he got asked. And it's like, what? Has anybody not watched Travis Hunter, who plays like 100-something plays a game? And I was arguing this the other day with somebody on Twitter who was saying, well, the kid from Boise State should win the Heisman Trophy. If you look at Ashton Biddy's numbers compared to some of the guys that have won the Heisman Trophy, he blows them away. And I say, yeah, he does. He's the best running back in the country. He ain't the best player in the country. And sometimes the best player in the country doesn't win that award. Normally it's a quarterback award for stats, and it is sometimes the running back, award. And what he's doing is absolutely phenomenal. I'm really anxious to see when the 12-team playoff happens, If Boise State gets in, which as of right now they got a bye, which we'll get to in a little bit because that's just ridiculous. Like if they get matched up against Ohio State, I think Ohio State beats them by 2 or more touchdowns, and I think Ohio State will shut the kid down. But we'll see. I'm not taking anything away from them. I'm just saying, to me, if you ask me this, and I say this every year, people will say the Heisman Trophy goes to the best player in the country. Travis Hunter is the best player in the country. He might have won it last year, but last year he got hurt. Now, I think people keep overlooking the fact that I keep saying if you had to give me my three, it would be Hunter, Shador, Ashton, and then Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback from Oregon, would be right there. Cam Ward obviously would be right there too. But I just think what they're doing is special. Again, when they lose, everybody will send me 100 text messages and say, "I told you so." Your guy Prime, your guy Prime. I just think what he's done for the university is phenomenal. He's brought a lot of money to that school, and he's going to get more players. And I'm anxious to see what happens at the end of the year. If Florida State, the job comes open, last week you remember me saying, I think if that job comes open, I think that is the job for Coach Prime. Some are saying Dallas, he's got the relationship with Jerry Jones, and maybe Dallas tanks the season. They go get Shador, and they go get Dallas. Ain't happening. Maybe the Giants. I don't know. Shador. The Giants are going to need a quarterback. Maybe that happens. I don't know, but I don't want to talk NFL. I'm not an NFL guy. I'm more of a college guy, so that's where we're going to stay. All right, we got to get into. I want to get into a little bit here, and then get into some predictions here at the end. I want to get into this 12-team playoff that was released last night, and I don't know, this committee. What the hell are you doing? That's all I'm going to say. So right now, you're 4 teams that get the byes, and this is based off of conference championships that we're saying right now. Oregon would be one of them that Oregon would win. Right now is the favorite to win the Big Ten. Don't think they beat Ohio State, but I'm not picking that game. They're not playing yet, but Oregon's the one right now. You have Texas is the other one. Right now they're favored as the SEC champ. Miami is favored as the ACC champ. And this is where it gets a little dicey, because Boise State is 4th. And Boise State is 4th because in the actual college football rankings, Boise State is ranked ahead of BYU, who would be, if BYU wins the Big 12 or it's Colorado, they would be up here hosting. They'd get a bye, and then they would host a home game. So right now they got Boise State, and here's how it would pan out. Alabama's 9th, and they would play Notre Dame. Okay, the winner of that game would get Oregon. Ole Miss at 10 would play Indiana. Now, the interesting question to me is going to be this. When Ohio State beats Indiana this week, Ohio State is going to hammer them this week. That's just my opinion. I think they beat them by 2 or more touchdowns. You guys know how I feel. I'm a Michigan guy. Even my wife says, I cannot believe you picked Ohio State to win the national championship. I'm doing it because I'm trying to jinx her. Just kidding. But how about if Ohio State beats Indiana? Indiana has 1 loss. Are you going to keep a 2-loss Tennessee out over a 1-loss Indiana whose strength of schedule is like 106? Like on a neutral field, I just want everybody to think of this. On a neutral field, Ole Miss, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Texas A&M, who, by the way, only has 1 loss and nobody's talking about. Texas A&M, on a neutral field, who would you pick? I don't know. You're going to ask me. I'm going to tell you who I'm going to pick. I'm going to take every one of those SEC teams. The Big Ten stinks. The bottom half of the Big Ten is horrendous. The top half now, of course, Oregon, yep. Ohio State, yep. They're the 2. Penn State. Does anybody have any trust in James Franklin? I don't. I'll root for Penn State in the playoff, depending on who they play, just because I've always liked Penn State. But again, okay, you got Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, and then Indiana right now. Michigan stinks. Michigan State stinks. Minnesota, I love PJ Fleck. They've been good, but I don't know. If you take the middle of the pack SEC to the bottom half, like Missouri's got 3 losses, LSU's got 3 losses. LSU and Missouri would hammer Indiana. I think so. I mean, you don't think so? I think they would hammer Indiana. Okay. But anyways, let's just see how it plays out. This is the big game for Indiana. Now, the way they have Indiana ranked at 7, if it's a close game against excuse me, if it's a close game against Ohio State, okay, maybe you keep them in the 12-team playoff, maybe. Um, but if you look at the schedule, and I have my cheat sheet because I didn't put this on my sheet, and I was looking at the schedule one more time to say, how do I find a way for Kurt Signetti to stay in? Because I love Signetti, just got the extension. Florida, the FIU, not very good. Western Illinois, not very good. Charlotte, not very good. Maryland, not very good. Northwestern, not very good. Nebraska, not very good. Washington, okay, they're over 500. Okay. Michigan State, not very good. Michigan, not very good. Purdue, horrible. And then you have Ohio State. So are you putting a 1-loss Indiana in over potentially a 2-loss Tennessee right now that's on the outside looking in? I wouldn't. Just saying. So then you have Ole Miss at 10 against Indiana. And I think we would all say that, again, I think it's a really good story, but they'd have to go play at Indiana. Ole Miss is used to playing in front of 90,000 people. Ole Miss right now, I think, is the most dangerous team in this 12-team playoff because I think they've gotten better. I think defensively up front, they have 3 of the best defensive tackles in the country. They can run the ball, and they're playing really good run defense. I think Ole Miss, to me, is the scariest team of the 12 teams left. Yep. I think they hammer Indiana if that were to happen. And then if it stays that way, they play Texas. I think they can beat Texas too. So then you have Miami at number 3. I think SMU wins the ACC. So I think when they play, I think SMU is going to beat Miami. But we'll go with Miami for right now. Georgia is the 11th seed. They have the number 6 strength of schedule in the country, and they have them at number 11. Now, right now on paper, they'd have to travel and go play Penn State. Georgia would hammer Penn State. If they play today, Georgia hammers Penn State if Carson Beck plays the way he did last week. And again, I said last week, and I'll say it again, to go and play at Happy Valley in the middle of December, maybe snow, with that defense, good luck. And I think it'd be a good game, but I think at the end of the day, I think Georgia wins that game. And then you'd have Ohio State playing. Right now, it's BYU. If Colorado wins the Big 12 championship, gets there and wins it, they would be one of the first 4 buys. So this wouldn't even be a matchup, but I'm just going to talk about it anyways. I think it's a horrible matchup for Boise State because I think Ohio State's really good defensively against the run. I think Ohio State washes BYU out of the building. Or if it's Arizona State, I think they wash them, wipe them completely out. Ohio State rolls them. Big loss, as I said earlier on the show, if you're just tuning in, the Buckeyes lost their starting center, Seth McLaughlin, who I think to an Achilles in. I think he tore his Achilles in practice. I think. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what happened. He was the anchor that offensive line where the right and left guard struggled, but they were playing much better, and that's because of their center was helping with that. So now we're going to have to see if they move people on that offensive line around a little bit. But I think it's a bad matchup for BYU if that were to happen. And then if it's Ohio State, Boise State, I think Ohio State destroys Boise State. So we'll see. So you got 4 Big Ten teams, and you got 4 SEC teams, and then the 2 teams right now that are on the outside looking in, but they can play themselves in. I think more of SMU though. I don't think Tennessee. If Tennessee wins out, I think they got UTEP and then Vanderbilt. So if they went out and finished with 2 losses, I don't know. I don't know how you keep Tennessee out with that defense. with Nico, the freshman quarterback, who's been awesome this year, and the job Josh Heupel's done, I think, has been fantastic. I like him. I always have been a Heupel fan. SMU can win the ACC and win it, they're in. So they got a chance. So right now they're on the outside looking in. So you could get 5 SEC teams in, but right now you have 4 and 4. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I think I don't really have a problem with the 12 teams they have in. I just have a tough time with Georgia right now at 11 with the toughest. They play the toughest schedule in the country. And again, I think the question's going to be, I think the next 2 weeks are going to play this thing out. Lane Kiffin made a really interesting comment this week on TV. And Lane Kiffin said, the SEC coaches are hoping they don't play in the SEC championship game. Because think of it this way. If Ole Miss gets there with 2 losses, or Alabama, Georgia, whoever gets there with 2 losses, and they lose. So now you have the debate. Well, you got a 3-loss Ole Miss team, and you could have a 1-loss Oregon, a 2-loss Ohio State, a 1-loss Indiana. What happens? Like, what do you do? So I think that would be a really interesting scenario. Now, the committee last night said if teams get to their conference championship game and lose, they're not going to be penalized. All right. And I feel like that's what we see in basketball all the time is, okay, you get this team that's playing really well and they get into their conference tournament, they get bounced. And it's like, oh, man. If that's what the committee is going to stand by, then I could see a 3-loss SEC team still getting in. But I think the interesting debate is going to be this too. What if Indiana goes to Columbus and beats the Buckeyes? Not going to happen, but you got to play it out, right? We've seen a lot of crazier things in college football. What if they go into Columbus and beat the Buckeyes? So now you have a 2-loss Ohio State team that's not going to play for the Big Ten title. So now you're going to debate, does a 2-loss Tennessee get in? Does a 2-loss Ohio State team get in whose strength of schedule is not very good either? They haven't played anybody. It makes you start thinking of how this thing could potentially play out. And now what's this going to set up for? 15 teams next year or 16 teams next year. 20, whatever it is, right? Can you imagine if we were talking about the 4 teams right now? The 4-team playoff, we'd be saying, wow, how would you like to be the committee to try to pick this thing, right? Now, just think about it. Now we're at 12 debating who may not get in or may have 3 losses. Are they better than a 1-loss team with 3 losses because the SEC, the strength of schedule is just brutal in the SEC? So I think there's a lot of good questions still to come. All right. I got to do my predictions and I'm out of here for tonight. Hopefully you like sitting and listening to me talk or you're listening to me on the replay. I appreciate it. I love talking college football. I have a really, really good show on the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch this Sunday. We're back. So we're going to kick things off Sunday morning at about 9. We'll start at 9, but at about 9:10, a former RFA teammate of mine who I've had on the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch numerous times. I've had him on the Rock Pile. Jimmy Catanzaro, who is the head coach at Lake Forest College. They are in the Division III playoffs. His team is undefeated, so they got a bye this week. We'll talk to him at about 9:10. And then at 9:30, we're going to talk to Whitesboro head football coach Curtis Schmidt. Coach has been on with me numerous times as well. I messaged him last night, and I said in my message, I said, Coach, Sunday, if you have time, I'd love to be able to talk to you after a win over Horseheads. They play Horseheads on Friday night at CNS High School. But Coach said he's going to come out on me, win or lose. He's going to win that game. I know they're going to win. I like him this week. But I'm excited to talk to him. He'll be on at about 9:30. And then at about 9:50, I'll talk RFA field hockey. At about 9:50, I think I have Coach coming on with me then. So we'll talk some RFA field hockey, Whitesboro football, and we'll talk some Lake Forest College with an RFA alum, former teammate of mine, Jimmy Catanzaro, at a little after 9 o'clock. So let me get to some of these predictions here, and then I'll see what you guys think. So the first game I'm going to pick here, if I can get it up on my screen, is we're going to go with Indiana at Ohio State. The line is 13.5. I know people are going to say that's a big line. I would take the Buckeyes minus the 13. I think they hammer Indiana. I really do. I know it's been a great story with this Indiana team, and it's gotten Kurt Cignetti, I think, a $40 million extension, which he deserves. But I'm going to say I think just Ohio State's too much. It's at home. I think they win big. So I'll take the Buckeyes given the points this week at home to Indiana. The next game, I think this can be a really interesting game, is Ole Miss at Florida. Florida coming off that big win against LSU at the Swamp. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold here, but I can't get rid of this cough. But Florida at 5.5, they're getting 10.5. This is one of those games where I really want to take Florida getting the points because I think they're going to play hard for Billy Napier. And then I think they lose this game. And I think next week they beat Florida State, and I think they get to a bowl game. I'm going to take Ole Miss laying the 10.5. I just think Ole Miss right now is playing on a mission. I think they're playing their best football on both sides of the ball, and I think Jackson Dart's going to be the story here. Give me Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin to keep the Lane train moving heading into the last week of the season against Mississippi State in the rivalry game. I think that's usually on Thanksgiving, so we'll see about that one. The other one, this one, I'm on the SMU bandwagon too. I think SMU, as I said earlier in the show, I think SMU wins the ACC. At Virginia, Virginia is getting 9.5. I like SMU laying the points. I like them to win by double digits, so I'll take SMU there. Some of these games, not really a lot of big games. Illinois, I love Brett Bielema. I think he's done a fantastic job this season. At Rutgers, Greg Schiano's got Rutgers back in a bowl game again. They're only getting a point. Somebody knows something about this game because I think Illinois should be getting a lot more, should be giving Rutgers a lot more than one. So I don't know. Maybe somebody knows something. Somebody's not playing for the Fighting Illini, but I'm going to take the Fighting Illini at Rutgers, giving Rutgers one. I think they move to 8-3 on the season. I do think this game in the Big Ten is going to be really good. I think this could be a tough game for Penn State. I really do, because Minnesota loves to run the football, and I think PJ Flex had a really good year this year. They've had some good wins this year, and I think his name the last couple of years was floated. Maybe his time in Minnesota is coming to an end. You know, some people have said maybe he deserves a bigger job. I think he's the right fit there. I think Minnesota covers. I'm not sure Minnesota is going to win this game, but again, maybe this is that game on the schedule where every year you say Penn State lays an egg once a year. Maybe this is it on the road. I just don't see it. I'm going to take Minnesota getting the points, but I'm going to take Penn State to beat them. But I like Minnesota to cover the 12.5 at home. A big game in the Big 12. The winner of this game is going to probably play. If Colorado wins, that's who's going to play for the Big 12 title. I said this before. I said it earlier in the show. I'm going to say it again. The job Kenny Dillingham has done at Arizona State, nobody knows about. Nobody follows Arizona State. All they're going to remember is Herm Edwards and the NCAA violations, the sanctions, blah, 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 blah. The job that he's done this year to have Arizona State 8-2, not only am I going to take Arizona State minus the 3, I think they throttle and steamroll BYU. I think Arizona State can beat Colorado in the Big 12 title game and get to a playoff. I really do. I think they're that good. So I'm going to take Arizona State in this game. Minus the 3 points, and I think that'll knock BYU out of the Big 12 race, and then we'll wait and see what Prime does against Kansas, who is the game that I have up here. Now, Kansas, don't let the record fool you. As I said earlier, you know, Daniels, the quarterback, Jalen Daniels, missed a lot of time at the beginning of the year. This team's peaking at the right time. Could they beat Colorado? Yes. Will they beat Colorado? No. And I'll take Colorado laying the 2.5. I think Colorado's just on a mission. I think they're one of the best teams in the country. I really do all around. So I think they go down to Kansas. They find a way. They beat Kansas. They cover the 2.5. It sets up Colorado and Arizona State in the Big 12 title game, and the winner marches on to the 12-team playoff. Would be absolutely crazy. Two more games I'm going to pick, and I'm out of here. Army against Notre Dame. This is a really big one. This is in the Bronx at Yankee Stadium. Notre Dame is a 14.5-point favorite against the 9-0 Army Cadets. This is a big number. I just really haven't watched much of Army this year. I know they throw the ball a little bit more. They still run the traditional triple option, the wing tee and stuff. I don't know if they cover the 14.5, man, but I'll tell you, this Notre Dame's just one of those teams I'm just not sure about. I can't get over the NIU loss, but I am moving forward saying Marcus Freeman's done a really good job. I love Marcus Freeman. He's a former Buckeye. But I love him. His kids play hard for him. They love him there in South Bend. I'm going to take Notre Dame here. But if Army beats Notre Dame, man, the 12-team playoff chaos, it gets even crazier next Tuesday night when they release it. So I'm going to take Notre Dame. And I'm going to take Notre Dame laying the 14.5 over a really good Army team and a really good story this year for the Cadets. Now, I posted this on Twitter. And I don't know if my Patriot League people are going to be watching this or not, but I am going to pick the Lehigh-Lafayette game. And Lehigh and Coach Cahill, I've had him on the show every year. He's kind enough to come on and talk to a Fordham guy. He was a New York Mills alum. Last year was his first year at Lehigh, and this guy has got this thing turned around in just a few years. Lehigh has a chance if they win this game over Lafayette, who last year Lafayette won the Patriot League. They got a chance. If they win this game at home, they go to the FCS playoffs and represent the Patriot League with a Patriot League title in year 2 for Coach Cahill. I don't know if anybody, and I think I had, and I'm not going to lie to Coach, I think I had Coach Cahill picked in the middle of the pack, which I was completely wrong because I think I had a Lafayette pick to win the conference. And then I think I had Fordham and Colgate, and then I think maybe Bucknell and then Lehigh. And Colgate struggled this year. Fordham struggled this year. Lafayette, not the type of – it's still Lafayette, though. This could be a really good game. This is the 160th meeting of this rivalry, one of the oldest rivalries in the country. Lehigh has won 13 Patriot League championships. This would be the first time since 2017 that Lehigh's won the Patriot League championship, and this is the first time. This is a crazy stat. And the Lehigh Lafayette people, if you do ever watch this, you probably knew this stat. I did not. This is the first time in 19 years that both teams have winning records. And I had to go back. So I'm like, this is a really old rivalry. I'm sitting there saying 160th meeting, the first time they've had winning records. So I think it's going to be a really good game. Throw away the records in any rivalry game. You could be 0-10 against 10-0. Throw those records away. It's always going to be a really tight game. But I'm going with my guy, the Mohawk Valley guy, the New York Mills alum, always kind enough to come on the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch with me. And I'm hoping at the end of the season, I'll have him back on and talk about the season that he's having. But I'm going Lehigh 24-20. Lehigh's defense gets a really big stop late in the fourth quarter. Offense, they're going to run the ball really well. Coach does a great job with that offense. Coach Nagy, who I played for as the defensive coordinator. Coach Hunt, the former Colgate coach, is the offensive coordinator. I think defensively they come up with a really big stop late in the game. 24-20 Lehigh. Lehigh punches its ticket to the Patriot League championship. So, Coach, go get it. Best of luck, and I know we'll get you on again soon to talk some Lehigh football. So I hope you had fun tonight. I love this thing. I started doing it. I said, let me do the Facebook Live. And I said, I got to get back behind the mic in studio like I normally do this thing, talk football with you guys for as long as I can, just on some key things. But I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Again, the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch will air Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, 9:10, Jimmy Catanzaro, 9:30, Coach Curtis Smith, the Whitesboro head football coach. And then at 9:50, we'll talk RFA field hockey as well on their magical run to the state Final Four this past weekend. So we'll talk about all that and more on Sunday morning. So on behalf of the Rock Pile, on behalf of myself here, I appreciate you tuning in tonight. The Rock Pile is where dreams become reality. Have a good evening.